you considered the messages your outfits send? What do you think your clothes say about you? See, style is about the clothes, but it's not really about the clothes. Every day you make choices about what you're going to wear, but what are you communicating? Welcome to Above and Beyond Style. I'm your host, Maria DiLorenzo, and in 2019, I founded MFD Style, where I provide a unique, intuitive approach to personal styling for those ready to embrace a more meaningful look. With this podcast, I'll uncover key elements of where spirituality, psychology, and style intersect, revealing how you can make intentional wardrobe choices that reflect who you really are. So let me ask you, are you ready to transform into your authentic self? Then it's time. Come with me on this journey, and together we'll take your style above and beyond style. Hi everyone, welcome back to Above and Beyond Style. I'd love to talk with you this week about the concept of wardrobe re-entry. It's funny, I was thinking about this title and this word, and re-entry was a kind of a phrase that years ago, one of my first jobs, I remember a colleague would talk about, when she would go visit like her family or spend some time away from work, and inevitably would be gone and then need to kind of come back to work and back to life and, all the various day-to-day things that we all, have to deal with, how there is always a period of re-entry, right? Like getting back into the routines, the kind of the hustle and bustle and whatever sort of felt like was the norm. And I always loved that concept of like, when you've been sort of away from your life in some capacities, maybe you're on vacation or you're traveling, and then there's this period of time where you need sort of the re-entry period of getting back into your life. And it's always stuck with me all these years as I've obviously done a lot of traveling myself and gone back and forth because my family is at a distance as well. And so this kind of concept of the re-entry phase, I feel like is one that I often come back to and think about as life is evolving and changing. And that's kind of the essence of today's episode, is really to talk about change and recognizing the ways that wardrobe is changing alongside us as we change. And there are some pretty important and pivotal things that I think have been happening to all of us, especially over the last several years. But just recognizing where that change can be pretty pointed for some of us, depending on these circumstances, and how then our wardrobe is sort of along for the ride with us as we go through these changes. And it's given me some perspective on how wardrobe can really help us move through the changes and give us opportunities to really maybe look at some of those changes with a different set of eyes. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the takeaways from the concept of wardrobe re-entry. But first, I want to talk about the variety of ways that change might be happening to you. And this is really in an effort to try to help normalize and give you some affirmation and reassurance that there are no people in this world where they are stagnant and the same every day, right? Change is that given that we are always kind of allowed to either embrace or in some ways reject, depending on, our own perspectives around it. And I think for a long time, I can remember as a child, even well into probably my early teen years, I would be teasing with my family and, something inevitably would change up, whether that's, our meal routines or, if we went someplace on a particular day or, we were a pretty regimented family that way. And in a good way, I think that helped my parents kind of keep things on track and keep things manageable with 3 children and, obviously a busy lifestyle. But I remember as a kid, I had this very, confident stance around change is bad. And my family would tease me kind of relentlessly about it because obviously that sort of perspective was not going to serve me for a long time. But it was one of those things that I think I never really embraced or understood the nature of. Things can't always stay the same. And as much as I might really love predictability and routine, and I talked to you before about how I'm a pretty organized person, and my type A personality in many ways loves predictability and really enjoys kind of that known factor. And for many years, that was really unsettling for me when I was unable to kind of embrace change. And it really became sort of this joke in my family about yeah, Maria, change is bad, remember? And I've had to really overcome that in some very significant ways in my life. And recognizing that change has often been the doorway to some amazing opportunities and just risks that I've had to take because I was willing to embrace change in new and different ways. And so when I think about change now and sort of where I used to be and my mindset used to be around it, it's really fun to see how that's evolved and obviously matured and grown, but also given me this new perspective on how to really embrace change and to feel more comfortable around it. Because I think that's in some ways kind of the essence of why it's difficult for a lot of people, that it requires a shifting and a changing and a movement that feels uneasy or doesn't give us that same sense of security and consistency that maybe we really enjoy. And so having to pivot or move around, move things, either whether that may be physically or not, that we've had to become this sort of malleable creature to embrace sort of whatever changes are coming our way. And in many ways, these significant points in our lives where change has happened. And I want to talk about some of the very real changes that are, I think pretty formative and transformative for a lot of people, myself included. And obviously change happens on the most minuscule level as well. And I don't want to only glorify those changes that are big and significant, but I want to just acknowledge that change is happening constantly and that the more we can really embrace and understand how this change is giving us the opportunity to look at our lives, and in this particular podcast, to look at the way that we get dressed and the choices we make around our wardrobe, can help us lead a fuller life. So, big transitions I've really seen in both my life and among my clients, among friends, neighbors. They're pretty, varied. And I really think about relationship transitions where people are getting married, people are getting divorced, people are now widowed, people are still single. Right? There's just sort of all these different layers of how relationships, and I'm obviously pointing to romantic or more intimate relationships, where those transitions and those changes are really significant. And I'm sure many of you listening have experienced that either in your own life or you've known someone to go through that pretty big change, and how uprooted someone might feel when that change comes to fruition. And those types of changes in our relationships, and this is also, we've heard a lot about through the pandemic, the nature of how much relationships have changed, even on just the personal level of friendships, and the ways that those relationships have really sort of taken a different shape, and some have fallen by the wayside and others have risen to the surface that we didn't really see coming. And it's just been a very unsettling time in that way, because in many ways we rely on the predictability of those relationships. And so when we transition between those types of places among the people that we're partnered with, that's a pretty big change. And those things can often elicit an opportunity to even look at clothes a little differently. So let me continue on with some of these other changes. Something else that I run into quite a bit, and this might just be, the age that I'm at, that many of my friends have had children and have really had to sort of re-enter the world in some capacity with their postpartum body and really become, acclimated in many ways to now having had a child, and what does that do to them physically, but also emotionally and psychologically. And how does that specific change of maybe even going from having no children to one or more children, and how that each, added family member is really creating these ripple effects of change in their own personal lives. The next level of change that has been extremely common right now, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about the Great Resignation and the number of people who, in the context of this pandemic, have really reevaluated their work life and the balance perhaps between work and home. And so that has allowed them to reevaluate their career, their professional life, and perhaps make some pretty significant changes in that space, whether that's leaving a job, getting a new job, perhaps moving from one industry to another industry. Many of us were confronted with the whole concept of, working perhaps in an office and then changing to working from home. And maybe now we're embracing a hybrid of those two things, or I'm hearing more and more people talk about the change of going back to work now after a couple of years. And, it's just amazing the amount of shifting that has happened in and around job and career and professionalism that way, that honestly, that has been, I think, touched basically everyone that I know, and especially myself, because within this last year, I actually took the big leap and decided to leave my corporate job and to move into styling full time and to be self-employed and to really pursue this entrepreneurial path. And so I too was amidst this very significant change and kind of re-entering a different phase of my life. And then of course there's kind of the other big change that I think of around like moving location, so physical location. So if you decide to move to a new town or city or state or even out of the country, what that looks like for you can be very significant. And the amount of change that is wrapped up in, a physical move or a location change is, I don't know if you've ever done it, but I tell you, I've done it a couple times in my life, and it can be very disorienting, and it really kind of brings to the surface all the things that, can feel unsettling amidst this movement. And so I'm pointing to all these sort of fairly significant, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of the significant ways that lives change as we are in adulthood and moving through our lives. But I just want to acknowledge the reality of how there is sort of a re-entry phase with every one of these changes. And our wardrobe really is, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, it's sort of along with us for the ride of whatever this change might look like or be. And so let me give you some of these examples around like those that are in relationship transitions, and recognizing that our wardrobe, as we shift and change our relationship, whether we're in a romantic partnership or even among friends, how our clothing often takes perhaps a different angle, or it looks a little different because we're now wanting to maybe present ourselves in a new and a different way, given this significant shift that has happened. I'm thinking of a couple of friends of mine in the last several years that have gone through divorce and have really had to be confronted for the first time in their lives with being sort of individual in their home space and in their personal lives, and their wardrobe really kind of got an opportunity to take a fresh look at that whole concept of their clothing, because they were really in an entirely different way of maneuvering through their life now as a single person. And not that they wouldn't be coupled up again, but we're talking about kind of in that specific space where they're having been partnered and are no longer partnered. And I can recall, really talking to some of those friends about, well, how do you want your wardrobe to now reflect this different phase of your life? And in some ways that was to reflect freedom and change that they were feeling. And in other ways, also acknowledging the sadness and the grief that was alongside the end of a relationship, and the ways that our wardrobe could really help, again, be alongside us as we're going through these experiences. And that's kind of how I look at this sort of concept around wardrobe re-entry, that whatever this significant change is that is perhaps happening to you in your life, I want you just to think a little bit about how your wardrobe can be along with you for the ride. And as I mentioned, that concept about seeing change is basically the only constant in our life. Like, we're always going to be embracing change and encountering it and maneuvering around it and with it. That perhaps there's some opportunity there in the essence of the change that might really help ignite something special for your clothes and your wardrobe. And perhaps it's an opportunity to kind of reinvent yourself and to step back into that space of really, again, talking about your authenticity and really getting to know who you are and who you want to put yourself out in the world to be among this change. Your clothes can be a really powerful tool to help you move through that experience. So if you're living in a new town, I'm imagining when I, moved from the south to the north, there was a very significant, change, not only just in the weather and the climate, but just the lifestyle of living in those two spaces. And my clothes, again, were along for the ride with me in those changes and helping me adapt and really kind of come to my own as I embrace this new lifestyle in a new place. And I think perhaps that's another opportunity that you can see, that this is a chance where you might be able to embrace a style that you've always wanted, that perhaps in sort of the former place where you were with whatever change that you might be confronted with, you couldn't maybe express yourself or really live that true authentic expression of your style. And now among this change, you might have the space and the time and the opportunity to do so. So it's, again, about that mindset and really looking at this as a position and a moment in time where you might be able to embrace that style in a new and a different way, whether that's wearing colors that you always wanted to wear, but perhaps maybe the partner in your life didn't love that color, so you opted not to, or in your, postpartum body, your before children, you might have worn one style, but now after children, you're wearing a different style and embracing kind of a new and a different way to dress your body. Changing jobs or industries is always a really interesting way to sort of notice where style can kind of come in as part of your brand and how you want to be known among your professional colleagues and your network and your contacts. And so it's really a lane for you to explore and experiment. And at the end of the day, I would always hope that you could look to style and wardrobe as that tool for support that you've heard me talk about many times, that among these changes and as we're, navigating the waters of challenge and learning to do things differently, how our wardrobe can help serve us, how it can really be a tool for us to leverage and utilize to be that person that we need to be at that given moment, among this moment of change. And I think as we're moving through our lives and really this re-entry concept is kind of always at play, whether we're going through significant or smaller changes in our lives. I just want you to remember the way that wardrobe can help you navigate some of these changes and these transitions, and that you might be able to use wardrobe in a really specific way and as a specific tool. Maybe not necessarily exclusively for support. Maybe you see it with a different lens. But I'd love you to really acknowledge that connection between change is the only constant. We all go through it. We all experience change in small and significant ways. We're all getting dressed. And how might your clothes and your wardrobe help you move through the change and re-enter life in a new and a different way that might open up some doors for you, that might give you a new perspective or new ways to sort of see things that you didn't see before. And this is sort of the magic in so many ways when I think about what wardrobe does for me and for people that I know and my clients, that there is so much to be learned and garnered from seeing wardrobe as more than just the way that we clothe our bodies, that it can be this source of support. It can be the way that we kind of come to know ourselves again through some of these experiences. So if you are amidst a change or you're about to go through one, I want you to really think about how your wardrobe and your wardrobe choices might really be that extra layer of something that you consider and embrace and experiment with, and to kind of help you move through the change on a smoother level, that it might give you a little bit more comfort and support and encouragement through this change, because we're all doing it, as I mentioned, and we're all making our very best effort at doing it in a way that feels right to ourselves. So for the re-entry process for you, I am excited and hopeful, and I will hold space for you in that regard to really think about how clothes can help you along the way. So thanks, everybody. I will look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you've heard, I would appreciate you taking the time to leave a review on the podcasting platform you're using, and share this episode with others who you think might really enjoy these conversations about personal style. For more information all about MFD Style services, you can find me on the web at mfdstyle.com, on Instagram at mfd_style, where I post almost 5 days a week, or send me an email at maria@mfdstyle.com. I also have a weekly email I send to subscribers, so I will include the link to that sign up in the show notes. So until next time, friends, remember to love yourself and then love yourself some more.